Welcome back, programmers, beginners, and I guess everyone in between, to another Python tutorial. Today we're going to be going over loops and iterations. Jump right into the code editor. All right. So loops are just ways to repeat tasks over and over again, and you'll see how useful they are in Python in a quick second once this editor starts up. Loading components. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file, bit of lag here, and we'll call it loops. Okie dokie. So there are two types of loops. The first one is called the while loop, and the second one is called a for loop. And the biggest difference between the two is that while loops are used for an undefined number of iterations, and a for loop is used for a defined number of iterations. We're going to go over while statements, while loops first. So let me create a simple while loop first. Right. Okay, so basically a while loop is kind of like an if statement. Basically, if the statement holds true, then the preceding action will, act. And what makes this different from an if statement is that when you go through, when the while loop first checks that the statement is true, does the action, and then goes back to make sure the statement is still true. When the statement becomes false or the conditions can no longer be met, then the while loop will break and exit the loop, essentially. So in a case like this, there's nothing stopping the while loop from being true, because true will always be true, and we're not telling the while loop to stop being true or telling the while loop to get out of the loop. So this will just print hurrah forever. And you'll see that when I print this out, when we run the program, you can see it just prints it out forever. And that's highly, we do not recommend this in Python at all, because it does make your program laggy. I'm just going to exit out this just so we have less space there. Okay. So a key word that we use in Python for, I guess they're using both loops. While loops definitely used more often. If you find yourself caught with in an infinite break or infinite loop and want to get out of it, or if you want to only use a while loop until something else happens and then get out of it. For example, if you had an if statement inside your while loop and you wanted to get out if your following statement was true, then you could use this keyword called break. And then essentially what it does is Python will check the statement, see if the statement is true, run the action, and once it sees breaks, it exits the loop immediately. So it won't bother checking to see if the statement is true. It will break out of the loop regardless whether this statement is still true. So I'll run the program, and you'll see it only printed hurrah once instead of doing it infinitely. So now that we got that covered over with, let's try something a little bit more, I guess, complicated. So I'm going to create a variable called I. I'm going to give it a value of 0. And I'm going to say while I is less than 10, then we want it to print I. And you wouldn't normally use this formatting for printing for if you wanted to do something like this, because you are using the for loop a defined number of times, which is as long as I is less than 10. So from basically from 0 to 9. That's when we use the for loops. But for the sake of this example, I'll show you. Whoops. I see what we forgot to do. It keeps printing out infinitely, but we forgot to change the value of I. So we're going to add 1 to I every time, as you can see, and it kept going until it got to 10. Started for 1 and ended at 10. So essentially what we did is we created a value, a variable called I, said 0 equal to it, and the while loop checked to see if I was less than 10. And since 0 was less than 10, it added 1. So we printed 1. Then it went back up and saw 1 is still less than 10. So it added 1 again and kept and printed out 2. And it kept doing that until it realized it was at 10. 10 is not less than 10, so it broke out the loop. When it got to 9, 9 was less than 10. 9, we added 1 to 9, and it printed out 10. But as I said before, once it got to 10, 10 is not less than 10, so it did not print out 10. Okay, so there's actually another keyword in Python, and that keyword is continue. And essentially what that keyword does is it tells Python to go to the next iteration and skip whatever block of code that's underneath it. So for example, actually I'm going to write something else. So I'll leave that there. And I'll say, change this up a bit. If I is equal to 3, we want to skip the code. Skip whatever's under it. So what Python will do is that it will do what it normally does and iterate through, and it will add one, keep adding 1 to I every single time. But once it gets to 3, it'll go through this. It'll see that this if statement is true, and it won't print out the value of 3. So I'm going to run that. You can see it went 1, 2, 4. It skipped 3 because the continue keyword tells Python to skip whatever's underneath it and go right to the next iteration. It's kind of like break when you only want to skip 1 iteration, or I guess 2 if you set it up that way. Another keyword is pass. And what pass does, it just tells Python to skip this line and just continue on with the rest of the loop. So this pass keyword is actually very useful when you just want to have a placeholder for a block of code that you want to insert later on, or when you're looking through your code and trying to figure out what mistakes you made, and you take out a large piece of code and if you just put in the word pass or keyword pass, Python will just know to skip that, and it won't give you an error saying that you need to put something here because you created an if statement or a loop. That's why this pass keyword is actually very useful. When we print this out, you'll see 3 is actually in there. It just skipped that line and did nothing. Now, we don't usually create temporary variables like this if we don't have to in Python. So this other loop, for loops, is actually very useful. As you can see, we use this while loop a defined number of times. We obviously know it iterated through that loop 10 times. But we don't want to do that if we have for loops, because for loops doesn't have to create a variable. Don't create variables. For loops, what a for loop does, it iterates through a sequence in the order it appears in that particular sequence. For example, no pun intended. If I say for number in in a range of 10, print I. Does it play it? Whoopsie daisies. Let's actually do this. Let's actually make these comments so that it doesn't interfere with our code. Print number. You'll see it iterated through a range from 0 to 9. And what the range function, I know you guys don't know what the range function is, so let me explain that to you quickly. The range function just creates a range of numbers between 0 and the number you input. It always goes one below the number you input. And so if you wanted to, say, make a range from 0 to 100, what you would do is you would just put 101 because it stops at 100. The range function you can also start at a particular number. So what you just do is put your starting number, and then it automatically has that ending number there. And if we print that out, actually, let's do a smaller number, just so you can see. It skipped 0 and started at 1. For loops can don't only go through a set of numbers, they can also go through a list. So, for example, if I create a new list, give it some random strings like play, play, dance, jump. Now, when I do this, I'll say for items inside the new list, print out that particular item. Print out the item. As you'll see, I printed out all the items inside the list. As I said before, for loops just iterate through a sequence in the order they appear in the sequence. So that sequence can be numbers, a list of numbers, a sequence of numbers, sorry, a list, or it can even iterate through a string. So we can say for letters in string, print letters. You'll see it printed out each individual letter inside the word string. It's actually very, very useful. That's why we use these. We use for loops when we know the defined number of iterations, and because we don't have to create extra variables, and it just makes the code easier to read. And that is pretty much everything you need to know in terms of loops and iterations. I hope that was very useful and very helpful. Please leave comments if you have any questions and tell me what I could have done better as usual. Leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.